introduce our second speaker, which is, I hope, with us, Marcin Majewski. He's a lecturer at the...
Thank you.
Yeah, hello, Marcin.
Hello.
Marcin is a lecturer at the Pontifical University of John Paul II in Krakow, Poland. He teaches mainly Old Testament, the Biblical Hebrew. He directs also several research projects, including also those in dealing with the translation of ancient cuneiform texts. He's also very popular and successful YouTuber, so that's also interesting. He tries to make this biblical text and biblical knowledge, how to say, more accessible to everyone. And his presentation is about the ancient translations of the book of Ecclesiastes. So the floor is yours. We have roughly 20 minutes.
Thank you, Marcin, for the presentation. Thank you very much to the organizer for the opportunity to participate and to give a lecture. Okay, introduction. In this lecture, I will take a closer look at the ancient translations of the Book of Qoheleth, a book whose textual history is far richer than its short size might suggest. Ecclesiastes traveled through Greek, Syriac, Latin, Ethiopian, Coptic, and Aramaic traditions. At each stage, the book was reshaped and reinterpreted. These translations are not only windows into early exegesis, they are part of the transmission of the biblical text. My focus will be twofold. First, I will examine the major ancient witnesses, the Septuagint, the Jewish Greek revisions by Aquila, Symmachus, Theodotion, the Syriac Peshitta, Vetus Latina, and Jerome's Vulgate, as well as lesser-known Ethiopian, Coptic, and Aramaic Targumic versions. Second, I will ask what this translation reveals about the history of the text itself, how stable the Hebrew Vorlage was, when and where textual variations appeared, and how later translators positioned themselves in relation to the earlier ones. By comparing these different traditions, we can also observe the directions of influence between translation. For example, how the LXX Septuagint relates to the later Greek revisors, or how the Vetus Latina stands in contrast to Jerome's version. The ancient version of Qoheleth shows that the history of the biblical text is a dynamic process of transmission across language communities, theological settings, and interpretative strategies. They remind us that the Bible, almost from the beginning, existed in more than one linguistic form, and that its meaning was carried through translation long before it was stabilized in a single written canon. After all, ancient translations of the Hebrew text are often older than the version of the Masoretic text we have today. Point 1. Greek translation of Septuagint. The book of Ecclesiastes was originally written in Hebrew, like most books of the First Testament, but in the Hellenistic period, many biblical books were translated into Greek. These translations were created for Jews living in the Greek-speaking world and for non-Jews who could read Greek but not Hebrew. The first and most important Greek translation is, of course, Septuagint. It is a collection of Jewish scriptures in Greek started in the 3rd century BC. Ecclesiastes was added to this collection very late, probably at the very end of the process, maybe even in the 1st or even the 2nd century AD. For this reason, its Greek differs from the rest of the Septuagint. The Greek translation of Ecclesiastes is extremely literal. The translator tried to match every Hebrew word with a Greek word, sometimes even keeping the same word order as in Hebrew. In many places, the syntax of the Hebrew original is simply copied into Greek, which makes the style heavy and unnatural for the Greek reader. For example, the Hebrew object marker et is translated mechanically as Greek sin, even though it makes little sense in Greek. Yeah? This kind of translation called formal equivalence or word-for-word translation. Because of the style, some scholars once thought that the translator of Ecclesiastes might actually have been Aquila from Sinop, the famous hyperliteral revisor of the Greek Bible. But now the definition differs. I have to I have to skip some part of my presentation, of my lecture. Scholars debate why the translator chose such a rigid, inflexible technique. The most common explanation is that the translator reflects a Jewish context in which Hebrew was regaining prestige as sacred language, and translator wanted to stay as close as possible to the original wording. Another reason might be that such a literal translation helped readers learn the Hebrew text through Greek. Ecclesiastes in the LXX also stands out because of its vocabulary. At least 37 words appear nowhere else in the Septuagint, and at least 16 of them is new, non-existent word. When we compare LXX Ecclesiastes with the Masoretic text, we see that the Vorlage, yes, the Hebrew behind the translation, the Hebrew text behind the translation, the Vorlage, is very similar to the medieval Hebrew text we have today. Still, there are some differences, a few extra lines, several variants readings, and some unusual renderings. This indicates that the translator used slightly different Hebrew text from the Masoretic version. Septuagint remains an important witness of textual criticism. In some cases, the Greek wording preserves reading that may be older than the Masoretic version. Some scholars note that the Greek translation gives the book a slightly more pessimistic tone, and that it shows influence from Greek philosophical vocabulary. It is also significant that in the Septuagint tradition, Ecclesiastes was treated as a poetic book, whereas in the Hebrew tradition, the Masoretes classified it as prose. Point 2. Greek translation by Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion. Beside the Septuagint, there are three other important Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible in antiquity, those of Aquila, Symmachus, and Theodotion. This version appeared after the LXX and were alternative Jewish translation, sometimes created in opposition to the Christian use of the Septuagint. Aquila of Sinop worked in the early 2nd century AD. His translation is famous to be extremely literal, yes, even more literal than LXX Ecclesiastes. He translated almost word for word and copied Hebrew syntax into Greek. Sometimes this made the text awkward or nearly ungrammatical for the Greek reader. When he had no Greek equivalent, he often chose transliteration or created a new Greek word. He also wrote the divine name, Tetragrammaton, in Hebrew letters instead of translating it as Kyrios, Lord, yes, and as Septuagint usually does. His translation had also a polemical aspect. He wanted to provide a Jewish alternative to the Christian reading of LXX. Symmachus worked slightly later, late 2nd or early 3rd century AD. His approach was the opposite of Aquila. Instead of literalism, he aimed to express the meaning of the Hebrew text in smooth, elegant Greek. The result is more natural idiomatic translation. When the Hebrew text was rough or obscure, Symmachus clarified it and made it sound more like Greek prose. This sometimes softens, make more soft the strong or paradoxical tone of Ecclesiastes. An example is how he renders the name Coelet. Instead of translating it as Ecclesiastes, teacher of assembly, he uses paroimiastes. That means the one who speaks wise sayings. Yes, this shows that he reads the book through the lens of wisdom literature and wanted the Greek reader to perceive Coelet as a teacher of wisdom, not a controversial troublemaker. And Theodotion, late 2nd century AD, represents a middle path between Aquila and Symmachus. He translated it closer to the LXX in tone, but more literal than LXX in structure. Okay, I'm skipping some parts. What is the role of these three in the history of Ecclesiastes text? All three translations were included in Origen's Hexapla because they were important for Jewish and early Christian exegesis. Modern scholars compare them with Septuagint in order to understand how the Greek version developed and how Judaism negotiated its scriptures in context of early Christian movement. These three Jewish translations are therefore crucial for reconstructing the textual history of of the book of Ecclesiastes in Greek, and for understanding how its interpretation evolved in late antiquity. Point 3. Syriac translation Peshitta. Ancient Syriac Bible called the Peshitta, which means the common or the standard version. It became the official Bible of the Syriac-speaking churches. The First Testament of the Peshitta was probably translated in the 2nd century AD. From which source was Ecclesiastes translated into Syriac? Everything indicates that the Syriac version of Ecclesiastes was translated directly from Hebrew, not from Greek, as earlier studies suggested. Its wording, structure, I have more on this topic here, but I'm skipping. Its wording, structure, and idioms match the Masoretic text very closely, although the Syriac text sometimes looks similar to the Greek wording. However, in few places, the Syriac text follows a Hebrew reading that is not preserved in the Masoretic tradition. This should suggest that the translator may have had access to a slightly different Hebrew Vorlage, possibly Proto-Masoretic form of the text. Hence, Peshitta is also an very important witness to the history of the text of Ecclesiastes and is a valuable reference point for the textual criticism. Point number 4, Old Latin traditions, translations, Vetus Latina. The term Vetus Latina refers to all early Latin translations of the Bible that existed before Vulgate. They were created in different places by different translators, starting probably at the end of 2nd century AD. For the book of Ecclesiastes, however, the situation is difficult because no complete manuscript of the Old Latin version has survived. What we have today come from indirect sources. We have 3 such indirect sources. I am analyzing of all these 3 sources, but here is time limitation, so I will skip also this part of these 3 sources for Vetus Latina. The translation technique of Vetus Latina, I also will skip it, but I will say that about the importance of Vetus Latina. Vetus Latina of Ecclesiastes shows how Christians in the West first understood Ecclesiastes. It provides a comparison point for later revisions, especially Jerome's work. And we are coming to point number 5, the Jerome's work, the Vulgate. The most important Latin version of Ecclesiastes is, of course, Vulgate, the translation translated by St. Jerome. His work on this book is unique because Jerome translated Ecclesiastes several times in different stages of his life, and each stage reflects a slightly different method and purpose. We have as many as 4 stages of Jerome's work on Kohelet. First stage is revision of the Old Latin. At first, Jerome did not create an original translation. He revised existing Vetus Latina, probably comparing it with the hexaploid of origin. This version is now mostly lost. We have second stage of his work, translation for his commentary. When Jerome wrote his commentary on Ecclesiastes in Bethlehem, he included his own fresh translation directly from Hebrew at the beginning of each commented section. This translation is very literal. We have that third stage of his work, free paraphrasing of Kohelet also in his commentary. In the same commentary, Jerome sometimes retranslate the meaning of the verse more freely and loosely to help readers understand the sense. And we have fourth stage of his work, the final Vulgate version. Yes, this version became the part of the Latin Bible. It was written about 10 years after his first work on the book. Here Jerome balances faithfulness to the Hebrew with stylistic clarity and elegance in Latin. The wording is smoother and more natural than in the earlier literal versions. Okay. The Vulgate became the standard version of the Ecclesiastes in Western Christianity, replacing all earlier Latin forms. Point number 6, the Ethiopian and Coptic translations. Forgive me, unfortunately, I also will omit the discussion of this translation due to time limitations, but maybe I will say just that the Ethiopian and Coptic translations of Ecclesiastes show the influence of Septuagint far beyond the Mediterranean world. And the Aramaic Targum is not so much a translation, because I also analyze the Aramaic version of Kohelet. Aramaic version is not so much a translation as it is rabbinic commentary inserted into the text itself. So, what we can see from this short summary. The survey of the ancient translations of the Ecclesiastes shows that this book traveled through different linguistic, cultural, and religious settings. The Septuagint gives us very literal translation that reflects late Jewish environment in which Hebrew was treated with special authority. The three Jewish revisers, Aquila, Symmachus, Theodotion, represent three different strategies of translating scriptures. Aquila, word for word, Symmachus translates the sense, and Theodotion looks for a compromise between both methods. The Old Latin translations confirm that in the Latin West, the earliest version came from the Septuagint, not from the Hebrew. The Vulgate, however, represents a new stage. Jerome turned back to the Hebrew and produced a text that joined fidelity with elegant literary style. And this version became the standard Bible for the more than 1,000 years. Yes. For believers, for Christians. What that means for the transmission of the biblical text? This study shows several important conclusions for textual history of Kohelet, but not only. First, there were several Vorlage, the Hebrew text before the translator. There were several Vorlage versions of the book of Kohelet. Masoretic text is a final form of a longer history. Second conclusion, the Septuagint preserves early Hebrew readings. So this translation is also very important. Third, the Peshitta confirms the stabilization of the Hebrew text. By the 2nd century AD, the Proto-Masoretic text was already dominant. Fourth conclusion, the Latin tradition shows a shift from Greek-based translations to Hebrew-based translations. This marks a turning point in Western textual history. And fifth, the Targum provides that the Targum proves that the book was reread, not only retranslated. The Aramaic paraphrases is interpretative, not imitating. In short, the ancient translations are part of the textual transmissions. They don't only reflect interpretation. In several places, they preserve very early stages of the Hebrew tradition of the Hebrew text itself. Thank you very much. 21 minutes.
Thank you very much. This punctuality, discipline. You had to skip some part of your presentation, but we hope that
I think it will be in the written form. Yes,
it will be possible to read everything.
Yes. It is.
Okay, so we have some time. If we have any question, we can make it just now.
I have a question. Thank you for your presentation. Very interesting. My question is, because you mentioned that Ecclesiastes represents in different forms the development of the Hebrew text, do you happen to be able to name these stages of Hebrew text of the book of Ecclesiastes?
Thank you, Piotr, for the question. This is difficult. This is very difficult because we can hypothesize some stages, but this is only hypothetical. What can we see from the analyzing of early versions of Kohelet? We can see that the Masoretic text we have, yes, we have Masoretic text from the Leningrad Codex, from the Aleppo Codex, from the Cairo Codex, no, from Aleppo and Leningrad Codex. The text, the Masoretic text we have now, we can see from this we can see that this text was established and was stable very early. I think first on second century AD, the text of Kohelet was very stable at that time. And the version of the Kohelet we have, for example, in Peshitta, or which was translation from Hebrew, we now know it today, and not from Greek. And the version we have in Septuagint can give us, in I think maybe 5, maybe 10 places, a kind of vision of Proto-Masoretic text. Yes. Kind of vision of Proto-Masoretic, and the stages I can point. Yes, the Proto-Masoretic text shown in Septuagint and in Peshitta, and after all, we have something like, I think, stable Masoretic text.
I see. Thank you. And an additional question: did you ever had an idea of comparing the techniques of translation of the book of Job and the book of Ecclesiastes, because both are kind of existential?
Exactly. The idea is the idea is excellent. I didn't do it.
Okay.
I didn't do it, but
Would be interesting.
When I'm analyzing Kohelet, I see many different translation techniques. So I think the comparison with Job, yes.
Yes, I mentioned
it would be. I think it would be very refreshing, very lightening.
Yeah,
I think
because both books are somewhat existential, I think.
Exactly.
Even for those times.
And they are coming in competition. They are coming in conversation with other books and other parts of Hebrew text. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Jakub, Bluj, next question.
Well, it's not exactly a question. It's just a remark about the comparison of the translation technique of Job and Ecclesiastic into Greek. The Greek translation into Hiob of Job is very, very peculiar, and I don't think it will bear fruits. So in itself, it's interesting, but I don't think it's so very idiosyncratic with Aristotelian marks. So.
Yes, if you say about Septuagint translation of the book of Job, of course, this is a very complicated part of critical textual criticism and other researchers, because the text of Job in LXX is quite different from the text that we have today. Yes, so I think with the case of book of Job, we have quite different Vorlage for the text than we have now today. Yes. For example, we have much more about Job's wife in the Greek version. That is completely absent in the Hebrew version, tak? Yes.
Yeah, this is true.
Mhm.
And the translation of Job is not consistent as far as technique is concerned. Some passages are quite close to each other and some are not, and who knows why. Who
Yes.
knows what was there in the mind of the translator
Exactly. Exactly.
or translators, for that matter.
Okay. Thank you. Another question? Maybe one question made by me. We know that you work on a commentary on the book of Kohelet. Am I correct? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So you have to translate the Hebrew text. So we have a quite good Hebrew version. But when you read all this translation, is there any cases in which the ancient translation helps you to understand better the Hebrew text? Do you have such a cases in
Yes,
work?
of course. Of course, in many times, ancient translation help to understand. They, of course, they understand. They help to understand how they, in their time, they understood the book of Kohelet. Kohelet has some verses that are different, that are hard to understand. So ancient translation, of course, help. I would say that. Ancient translation helped me beside this what I said now. It helped me also in one more way, because the text of Kohelet is mix of prose and poetry, and is very mixed text. Like I think Kohelet, he wants to be in the same time Hebrew. He wants to be in the same time. He wants to be Greek. Yes, in his teaching. Yes, and the same is about the style. He wants to be in the same time the teacher, so the text is a prose, and in the same time he wants to be a poet. So his text is very poetic. And the ancient translation helped me in few cases to decide or to look more carefully what kind of style we have in one pericope on our text, yes, one
Okay.
or another text.
Mhm.
Yeah, also in recognizing the style of Kohelet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So thank you very much for your presentation, for your answers, and